My name is Renata Vale, 38 years old. Mornings over the bakery smell like mercy. Yeast rising, sugar crisping on the air, the kind of warmth that says ordinary life keeps going no matter who stopped breathing. On Tuesdays, I catalog returns at the bookstore, a ritual of spines and barcodes that feels like prayer without the theology. I tell myself the quiet I built is strength. Other days, it's camouflage. On this Tuesday, my phone rings with a hospital number I don't recognize, and the floor I've taught myself to trust gives a gentle, treacherous tilt. Ms. Vale? A woman's voice, steady in the way of people accustomed to detonating news with soft hands. I am Dr. Shannon Reeves, Chief of Pediatrics at Riverside General. I need to discuss your son's case. It has been 7 years since anyone in authority said the word son to me. It lands like an exposed wire. Noah died, I say, to remind her, and maybe to anchor myself. 7 years ago. I'm aware, she replies. Could you come in today? There are discrepancies in the record that require your consent to review. Discrepancies. It's a bland word for a blade. I say yes before my better judgment catches up, hang up, and press my palm against the counter until my skin remembers its job. At the register, Patricia glances over, reading my face the way only women who've seen the inside of grief can. Go, she says. Family. That's what we called it back when the word meant arrived casseroles and shared calendars. Before it learned to mean liability clauses and who carries the gene. Before my ex-husband told a room full of men in suits that love is wonderful until it meets biology. I met Devon Hartwell at a medical conference I didn't belong to. I was the librarian assembling journals for people with letters after their names. He had the watch, the smile, the ease of someone who'd learned early that rooms liked him. You don't look bored, he said, which I later learned was his way of saying, I looked available to be charmed. I told him books were better company than most. He laughed in a way that made the kindergarten teachers swoon the day he came to read aloud, performing voices like a man auditioning for a gentler life. His mother, Vera, wore her husband's pharmaceutical fortune like a crest. She had the nurse's crispness even in retirement, a precision that could be care or cruelty, depending on whether you passed inspection. The first time she said my name, it was with tweezers. Renata, stretched to 3 syllables and placed on a tray. And a librarian. How quaint. The wedding was hers, a country club symphony of correctness. My family stood there in rented formality, trying not to scuff the pedigree. My sister leaned into me and whispered, Do you like them, or do you like him? I said love would teach the rest. Later I learned love can be a student who never does the homework. When I got pregnant, Devon transformed into a man with apps, checklists, weekly fruit metaphors. Week 16, avocado. By week 20, Vera was toasting the newest Hartwell Air with champagne that tasted like warning. She insisted on genetic screening early, just to be safe, dear, given your unavailable family history. My parents were both closed adoption babies from the 60s, paper trails locked in drawers time had lost the keys to. It had never mattered until it mattered to people who majored in legacy. Noah arrived 3 weeks early, small and fierce, my eyes and Devon's nose and a grip that made liars of men who claim babies don't know you yet. 11 days of softness I keep in a mental reliquary. First bath, first argument about whose features he owned, first time home in a blanket Vera corrected because the corners weren't crisp. She called him my little prince, and it sounded like destiny and inventory in the same breath. On day 12, his cry changed. Not hungry, wrong. The kind of wrong that wakes something animal in you. Fever climbed like a ladder I couldn't pull away. The pediatrician's voice went from calm to urgent between noon and evening. And by night, we lived under the bleached lights of the NICU, rhythm set by machines that taught us what a body does when it's trying to stay. Doctors spoke a language of enzymes and panels. They led us into small rooms, decorated with posters that wanted chromosomes to look like hope. We're concerned about a rare recessive condition, the counselor said carefully. It can hide for generations. Devon's hand slipped from mine with that sentence, as if my skin now carried the problem you catch by loving the wrong bloodline. Vera arrived in a navy suit that didn't know how to wrinkle. She moved like authority, read charts like scripture, asked nurses questions in a tone that assumed answers. "We should escalate to Northwestern," she said, and it felt like strategy, not comfort. Later, when the first panel was inconclusive but concerning, Devon's questions turned into a cross-examination shaped like care. "Her parents were adopted," he reminded the counselor. "Close files. We have no way to verify." By the third dawn, prognosis wore its truth without apology. A specialist explained the metabolic pathways like a map of a country we'd never meant to visit. Devon straightened his tie the way he did before presentations and said, "Your genes are killing our son." The nurse adjusting Noah's IV winced in the space between us. "Genetics happens," I said, and the sentence sounded both true and like a failure the moment it left me. Noah died at 3:47 a.m. on April 6th, while Devon sat in the chapel composing a speech he would later deliver as if the audience were shareholders. I held our boy's hand and told him I was sorry for all the ways I existed. The funeral took place at Vera's church under stained glass that threw righteous colors on people who were very certain about what had happened. The next day, a courier handed me divorce papers, irreconcilable differences, grievous emotional harm, and a proposal, waive claims, and he wouldn't pursue negligent infliction of distress. It turns out guilt is a signature they can use against you in court. I became a quiet person who lives above a bakery and takes pictures out of boxes when therapy insists. I learned to answer, "Do you have kids?" with a practiced smile that closes doors. People said time heals, and I learned time is a clever taxidermist. It makes pain look still enough to display. This morning began with coffee in a chipped blue mug and a pile of photographs I both dreaded and craved. Devon's arms around my pregnant belly at Navy Pier, all certainty and plans. Noah, a day old, fist like a seed pearl against his cheek. Our wedding, white roses framing a future that left no room for mess. In the background of that photo, slightly out of focus and perfectly telling, stands Vera in navy, expression arranged like a place setting. Watching. Evaluating. Already at work. When Dr. Reeves asks me to come, I drive to Riverside General on muscle memory I wish I didn't own. The parking garage still smells like solvent and exhaust. The elevator still stutters between the third and fourth floors, as if deciding who deserves to keep going. In the administrative corridor, they walk me not to a doctor's office, but to a conference room where blinds cut the daylight into obedient stripes. A man in a suit sits with a legal pad he won't have to use much, and another man has the posture of law enforcement even out of uniform. Their presence is a tide pulling the past from its shallow grave. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Reeves says, calm threaded with urgency. A folder sits in front of her like a sealed fate, but she starts with breath instead of paper. 3 months ago, we began digitizing old records. We found mismatches in several infant files, including your son's. Panels attributed to him were not his. His actual results. She opens the folder, and there it is, numbers that make a shape of normal. I don't realize I'm shaking until the pen near the legal pad rattles like a small animal. Dr. Reeves keeps talking. Toxicology, not in the original chart, elevated potassium chloride levels that do not belong in a newborn's blood in those quantities, an archival video system newly recovered. My mind trips over each clause, trying to graft a new story onto scar tissue that has spent years narrating blame. The detective speaks for the first time, voice blunt in a way I want to hate and end up needing. "Someone injected your son's IV." There is a particular silence that happens in a body when a truth fits too perfectly into all the spaces left by an old lie. It is not relief. It is not horror. It is a terrible, precise click. For 7 years, I have apologized to a child for my blood. For 7 years, I have let a family recast me as cautionary tale. For 7 years, I have looked away from certain memories because the edges were too sharp. And now the room tilts again, the same degree as when the phone rang, but this time I reach for the table and hold on. "Show me," I say, though no one has yet offered a screen. They exchange a glance that tells me the rest of today is going to change the shape of all my yesterdays. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor chirps like a metronome teaching someone new how to count time. I think of Vera's hands, how sure they always were, how she folded blankets and spread judgment with equal precision, and I feel a tremor start far away, gathering itself like weather. Whatever Dr. Reeves is about to show me will be worse than the lie I've lived and better than the sentence I wrote against my own life. I have the sudden, irrational image of white roses under stained glass, petals soft and beautiful and bruising at the edges, carefully arranged, perfect from a distance, rotting from underneath. The screen is already waiting when I sit, a black and white frame paused on a room I can smell even through pixels, gel and bleach and warmed plastic. Dr. Reeves warns me, in the voice doctors use before they reset a bone. This will be disturbing. The detective clicks play. Night shift dimness. Monitors blinking like a city viewed from far away. A figure in scrubs moves into the edge of the frame and then straight through it, efficient, unhurried, the choreography of someone who believes they belong. Even with a mask, some people advertise themselves in their posture, shoulders squared to the task, chin slightly lifted, the careful glance over one shoulder, not from fear, but from habit, cataloging, controlling. The syringe glints briefly. Tubing is lifted and laid back down. There's a small adjustment to the blanket that is almost tender. The figure turns enough to meet the camera for a heartbeat, eyes like winter glass. I feel my mouth shape the name before sound arrives. Vera. No one moves. The detective doesn't write it down, as if he knew I would know. Vera Caldwell, he says evenly. Volunteer access, former RN. We cross-checked badge logs for that night. She was in the building from 2:58 to 3:56 a.m. Pharmacy cabinet audit shows 1 ampule of potassium chloride logged out by a pediatric nurse who denies taking it. She reported her badge missing that week. It turned up in a laundry bin 2 days later. We think Vera used it. My body tries to split itself into the woman who has always known something was wrong, and the woman who needed an authority to say it out loud. I am both, and I am, for one wild second, a third person. The mother who hears this and runs toward a past she cannot alter, clawing at time like wallpaper. Dr. Reeves slides a document across the table, the paper warm from her hands. These are Noah's actual metabolic panels. Normal ranges. No markers for the disorder previously cited. And these are the toxicology results, a snapshot taken during a blood gas draw that wouldn't have been in the standard charting. The potassium concentration is not compatible with life in an infant without external cause. I told myself I killed him, I say, and the sentence doesn't ask for correction, so no one gives it. The detective adjusts the laptop lid a fraction, as if containing the image could reduce the size of the fact. How did she get in there? I ask, though I could answer it myself. People like Vera don't enter systems. They live inside them. Volunteer access, Dr. Reeves repeats. A clipboard, the right shoes, the kind of certainty that parts crowds. Then she adds, not for my comfort, but for the sake of accuracy, how mercy often sneaks in, and gaps in our protocols 7 years ago that we've since closed. The detective opens a slim file that looks thinner than it should for something this heavy. We have more. 2 months before your due date, your husband underwent a screening panel. He's a carrier for Huntington's disease. Dominant gene. A 50% chance for any child. The number rolls through me with the slow inevitability of weather. Vera, who built altars to legacy. Vera, who toasted an heir. Vera, who needed perfection more than she needed truth. Did he know? I ask. Records suggest he didn't, the detective says. The result portal was accessed from a device tied to Mrs. Caldwell. We believe she concealed it from him. A memory unfolds with a crispness I recognize now as curation. Vera at the baby shower in a sky-blue salon that smelled like peonies and ambition. Her speech about the Hartwell line. The way she looked at me like I was a decorative frame around something that belonged to her. Dr. Reeves lays down another sheet, a policy contract with numbers that wear a vulgar shine. 2 days after Noah's birth, a policy was taken out. $500,000, payable in the event of infant death related specifically to congenital or genetic illness. Beneficiary, your husband. I stare at the clause that shrinks grief into an underwriting category. So if a genetic story was told, I say, money moves. The detective nods. He invested it into a distribution company. He's had public success. In the space of 6 breaths, I move from a woman who blamed herself for bad blood to a woman who understands her child's death funded someone else's ascent. Guilt has a way of sanctifying the people who give it to you. Truth burns that altar down. I feel heat I haven't felt in years. It isn't rage. It's clarity. What happens now, I ask. We need your cooperation to proceed quickly, the detective says. We're seeking warrants. Video, access logs, toxicology, stolen badge statements. They paint a strong picture. But your identification of the person in the footage, your context, your willingness to testify will help us move decisively. There are words I might have used a decade ago. Cooperate, proceed, decisively. That would have tasted like deference. Today they taste like breath returning. Yes, I say, and it isn't a performance of strength. It's a simple, clean door opening. Arrest them. A flicker, relief, respect, crosses the detective's face before it smooths again. We'll coordinate the takedowns. Public enough to avoid risk, controlled enough to keep them from improvising. Mrs. Caldwell attends a weekly book club at the Lake Forest Country Club. Mr. Hartwell sits a Tuesday executive meeting at his HQ. We'll move simultaneously. I picture Vera in a St. John suit, pearls seated exactly where pearls belong, a glass of white wine lifted at a table where women discuss fiction they will not allow to change them. I picture Devon at the head of a table, speaking in bullet points, wrists expensive and bare. I feel no triumph, just alignment. We'll also be executing a search of Mrs. Caldwell's home office and devices, the detective adds. Given her background, we expect research, dosages, timing, maybe even practice notes. She rehearses everything, I hear myself say, and memory obliges. Vera folding a blanket in 3 precise motions and then refolding it because someone watched. Vera adjusting a place setting the caterers had already measured. Vera practicing outrage in a mirror no one else could see. Dr. Reeves gathers the pages, but not before I touch the one that names my son well. Normal. I don't cry. My tears are too expensive to spend on paper. Instead, I let a quiet inventory pass through me. The bakery downstairs, the blue mug, the box of photographs no longer accusing, the way my sister had kept her children away for years, just in case, the way my mother's prayers, loud in the kitchen and soft in the car, learned new words for asking. We'll need a statement, the hospital counsel says gently for a man who lives in liability, and permission to share parts of Noah's corrected chart with law enforcement. You have it, I answer, all of it. If I could sign my name across the entire past, I would. The detective escorts us down the corridor to a smaller room to record details. As the door closes, I'm aware of the NICU 2 floors above, like a chorus I can't unhear. I sit, and the camera's red light blinks on, and I say my name and my son's name and the date he was born and the hour he died and the moment on this very day when I stopped believing a lie that had almost ruined the rest of my life. I tell them about Vera's hands and Devon's tie and the way guilt rearranged the furniture in my mind. I tell them how certainty sounds when it's smiling. I keep my voice calm because I am tired of performing grief for people who measured it like a ledger. When we finish, Dr. Reeves walks me to the elevator herself. I'm sorry, she says. 2 words used so often they should be worn out, and yet somehow they land with fresh weight. I wish this had been found sooner. Sooner would have saved me some years, I say, not unkindly, but it wouldn't have saved him. The elevator doors reflect us as 2 silhouettes, and for a wild second I am younger, and it is day 11, and I am still allowed to be naive. The doors open. We step in. Ms. Vale, she adds, just before the doors close. When a system fails you this completely, it's not your job to forgive it. It is our job to fix it. Mercy again, smuggled inside a sentence about infrastructure. In the parking garage by Mansons. My hands find the steering wheel like they're reporting for duty. I don't start the car yet. I watch dust curl through shafts of late light and think of white roses under stained glass. How from a distance they looked like certainty. How close up they bruise. I consider calling my sister and imagine her, hand over her mouth, saying my name as if it has been returned to her from a long, cold place. My phone buzzes on the seat. A text from an unknown number, a simple confirmation that the warrants are being filed. Another message from Patricia. Are you safe? And I answer, I think so, which is the bravest truth I can write today. The detective's follow-up includes times and addresses, an outline of choreography. I will not dance, but will watch from the wings. I place my palm over the photos in the passenger seat, the ones I couldn't bear to leave behind when I came. Noah's tiny fist. Devon's performative joy, Vera's eyes in the background of a wedding day. I speak to the air that smells like solvent and say, "We're not done." Then I add softer, to the boy who never learned to crawl but taught me to stand. I see you. I see you now without the scrim they put between us. When I turn the key, the engine catches on the first try. It feels like permission. I pull out into the slow spiral of the garage and rise toward light. By the time the warrants were signed, I had memorized the choreography of vengeance dressed as justice, and his team planned it like a stage play. Precise cues, no improvisation. Vera would be arrested at her book club in the Lake Forest Country Club's solarium. Devon at the downtown glass tower, where his company's logo, Hartwell Therapeutics, sprawled across 10 glittering floors of ambition. Both arrests would unfold at 6 p.m. sharp. I told myself I wouldn't watch. But when the detective offered, "You can be here when it happens," I said yes, before my mind could hide behind dignity. Watching wasn't about revenge. It was about seeing the lie end in daylight. For 7 years, I'd been the villain in a story they wrote. It was time the curtain changed sides. The station conference room was cold. Dr. Reeves sat beside me with her coffee cooling untouched. Her presence the quiet gravity of someone who has made a career of telling people the worst truth and still showing up the next day. The digital clock on the wall clicked toward 6. Every tick reminded me that somewhere, Vera was probably arranging napkins and refilling her wineglass, perfectly composed, completely unaware her control was seconds from evaporating. At 6:04, his phone vibrated. He answered, nodded, said nothing. Then, "Caldwell is in custody." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Dr. Reeves placed her hand over mine, grounding me like a mother teaching a child not to flinch at thunder. "Devon?" I asked. The detective paused, listening to the voice on the line. "Also in custody, no resistance." He hung up. "They'll be brought in separately. You can observe from the interview room if you wish." I followed him down a hallway painted in government beige that never learned warmth. Behind the one-way glass, the table waited. Metal, functional, merciless. The first to arrive was Vera. Even in handcuffs, she managed dignity as performance art. Her silver hair was perfectly set, her St. John suit smooth, pearls unbothered. She sat with the erect posture of someone who refused to believe the world could rearrange without her permission. Her lawyer, a downtown predator named Peyton, flipped through papers and whispered strategies that Vera ignored. When entered, she didn't look up. She straightened her pearls. "This is ridiculous," she said before anyone asked a question. I was helping my grandson. He was suffering. Detective Watts took the seat opposite her, opening a thin folder. "Mrs. Caldwell, we have video footage showing you entering the NICU at 3:47 a.m. on April 6th, 7 years ago. We have records of you removing potassium chloride from the pharmacy under a stolen nurse's badge. We have your computer logs researching dosage and detection methods. Do you wish to make a statement?" Her eyes, those same polished glass eyes from the video, shifted toward the glass wall separating us. I knew she couldn't see me, but instinct makes ghosts look back anyway. "My grandson was in pain," she said evenly. "I spared him." The detective slid a page forward. "These are Noah's real genetic results. Normal, no disorder, no pain you could spare him from, just a healthy infant you killed." A crack, barely perceptible, spread across her mask. Her fingers twitched once on the tabletop before stilling again. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's fact," said. "And we also know why. Your son tested positive as a carrier for Huntington's disease 3 months before Noah's birth. You accessed that file. You chose to preserve the illusion of perfection." Vera's eyes hardened. "You don't understand what it means to build a legacy. My husband and his father before him spent decades creating the Hartwell name. It was not going to end with a flaw in the bloodline. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass between us, but I only leaned closer, watching the woman who had reduced love to blood purity finally confess without remorse. "Bethany's family," she continued, her tone almost clinical, "had no records, no pedigree, no traceable health history. It was a perfect cover. Everyone would assume the problem came from her side." She looked down then, her voice softening. Not regret, calculation. "Devon never knew. He couldn't. He's a good man, but fragile when it comes to failure. I did what was necessary to protect him." "Protect him." The words turned my stomach. Dr. Reeves murmured beside me, She's still in control, even now. Control, yes, but it was beginning to slip. Read aloud entries from her personal journals recovered from the search. Dates, doses, notes written in that precise looping script. March 10th. Devon's results confirmed. Huntington's marker present. Must preserve the line. March 15th. Bethany's unknown ancestry ensures blame will fall naturally. March 20th. Researching neonatal potassium administration. Dosage clarity achieved. Each entry cut deeper. I saw her scripting tragedy, like she once scripted dinner parties. When the detective asked, "Did Devon know?" Vera's eyes flared. He would never approve such a thing. But the evidence didn't agree. 30 minutes later, they brought Devon in. He looked smaller than memory. The sharp suit sagged. The swagger that once filled conference rooms was gone. When he saw the detectives, his first words were defensive reflex. "This is insane. My mother, she wouldn't. Bethany, tell them." He still said my name like I owed him rescue. Leaned forward. "Mr. Hartwell, your mother confessed to the act. We also found communication between you two discussing an insurance payout. $500,000 claimed 2 days after the death, categorized under genetic causes. Funds transferred directly into your business account." Devon blinked, confusion and fear colliding. "She told me it was compensation for our loss. She said the hospital required it because of Bethany's defective genes." His voice cracked. I believed her. The detective's tone stayed neutral. "You used the funds to start Hartwell Therapeutics. That money built your empire." Devon's hands trembled. "I didn't know." "You knew enough to destroy your ex-wife's reputation. You let the world believe she killed your son." For the first time, he fell silent. Then the dam broke. I wanted to believe the story because the alternative was unbearable, because if my mother was wrong, then everything was built on a corpse. In the observation room, I pressed my hand to the glass, not from pity, but from the ache of recognition. He had always needed a narrative that absolved him. He built an empire out of avoidance. They read him his rights. He didn't resist. When they let him out, he glanced toward the mirror as if he could see through it, and maybe he could sense me, the ghost of the woman he blamed, the one he'd made into a cautionary tale. Dr. Reeves exhaled. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but closer." The following days blurred into transcripts, formal statements, arraignment schedules. Reporters camped outside the station, hungry for headlines. Prominent philanthropist's mother charged in grandson's murder. I ignored them. What haunted me more was the evidence box they let me view once, briefly. Inside Vera's journals. Each page meticulous. One entry described me sleeping in the NICU chair, mother exhausted, window of opportunity, 03 Osquaz, 04 Hunquao, ensure syringe disposal separate. Another line recorded her rehearsing sympathy for Devon, practice tone, grief, but not hysteria. Even her compassion had choreography. When the formal charges were read, first-degree murder for Vera Caldwell, conspiracy and insurance fraud for Devon Hartwell, I felt nothing like victory, only relief so heavy it bordered on collapse. That night, I drove home through the drizzle, windshield wipers marking time. I passed the bakery, lights dimmed, the air still faintly sweet. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't avoid the box of photographs waiting on my table. I opened it. I set Noah's picture upright beside the mug, his small face meeting my gaze. "They're caught," I whispered. "The lie's over." Silence answered, soft and holy. I thought that would be enough, but endings, I've learned, come in layers. The trial was still ahead. So was the question of who I'd become once the story rewrote itself. For now, though, I allowed myself to sit in the fragile miracle of truth, finally having my side. The courthouse smelled of coffee and disinfectant, 2 scents that don't belong together but always find each other where truth is forced to speak. 6 months had passed since the arrests, and every day of those months had felt like walking on glass I'd spent years pretending wasn't there. Reporters swarmed the steps outside, microphones angled like bayonets. "Renata Vale, do you forgive them? Will you testify against your ex-husband? Did you know about the Huntington's diagnosis?" I didn't answer any of them. Forgiveness was a language I no longer spoke. Inside, the marble echoed with too many shoes. Vera entered first, wrists cuffed, but posture regal, as if the handcuffs were just misplaced jewelry. Devon followed in an ill-fitting suit, a man who had aged a decade in half a year. He didn't look for me, and I didn't look away. The state called it the People versus Caldwell and Hartwell. For me, it was the lie versus the truth. Dr. Reeves took the stand first. Calm, factual, methodical. She laid out the data that had changed everything: the mismatched genetic panels, the toxicology reports, the recovered surveillance footage. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. Numbers and timestamps spoke louder than any grief could. When the prosecutor pressed play, the courtroom went silent, except for the hum of the projector. The footage from the NICU flickered across the screen. A grainy image, a woman in scrubs, a syringe, a baby blanket adjusted like a final touch. I had seen it before, but this time I wasn't alone. This time, every juror saw what I'd lived beneath for 7 years. When the figure turned toward the camera, Vera's face filled the room. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Devon's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. His client flinched. But Vera, she didn't blink. The prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Caldwell, is that you on the tape?" Vera's chin lifted. "It's a poor quality video. Anyone could mistake identity in that light." "Then perhaps you can explain why your ID badge was used to access the NICU that night." Silence stretched until even the walls seemed to wait. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming emotional prejudice, but the judge overruled. The footage replayed. The timestamp glowed like judgment itself, 03:47 a.m. When it ended, the courtroom breathed again. My turn came 2 days later. I stood, palms damp, heart steady. "State your name for the record." "Renata Vale." "Relation to the victim?" "Mother." The word mother came out clean this time. No flinch, no shame. I told them about Noah's birth, his brief life, and the night machines sang his final lullaby. I described how Vera had hovered, polite concern wrapped around silent contempt. I told them about the funeral she choreographed, the eulogy her son performed, and the divorce papers that arrived before I'd washed the dirt from my shoes. "Did you believe your child's death was your fault?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes." "And who made you believe that?" "My husband and his mother," I said, looking directly at them. "They gave me a story and made me live inside it." Vera's lawyer rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp and mocking. "Ms. Vale, grief can distort memory, can it not?" "Yes," I said, "but facts don't." He tried to twist my words into hysteria, painting me as unstable, a woman desperate to assign blame after tragedy. He referenced therapy notes, old prescriptions for anxiety, even the box of photographs my therapist had encouraged me to open. "You were under psychological distress," he said. "Isn't it possible you projected your guilt onto my client?" I leaned toward the microphone. "For 7 years, I took all the guilt, every ounce. She never had to borrow any of it." The courtroom murmured. Even the stenographer paused before resuming her rhythmic typing. When Devon took the stand, I thought I was ready. I wasn't. He looked at me only once before addressing the prosecutor. I didn't know what my mother had done. I believed her when she said Noah's condition came from Renata's side. I needed to believe it. "Needed?" the prosecutor repeated. Devon's voice cracked. "Because the alternative meant my mother was capable of killing her own grandson." "Yet you accepted the insurance payout." "I thought—" He stopped. His lawyer's hand landed on his arm like a brake. "You thought what?" "That it was a settlement," he said finally. "Compensation for emotional damages." "Did you ever question the source of those funds?" He hesitated. The silence was its own confession. When the prosecution displayed emails between Devon and Vera, messages discussing how to control the narrative and protect the Hartwell image, he buried his face in his hands. The jury watched him come apart. The defense tried to spin it all as a tragic misunderstanding. An overprotective grandmother, a son too trusting, a grieving family crushed by miscommunication. But Dr. Reeves's testimony had already anchored the truth. Intent, dosage, timing. It was all too precise to mistake for mercy. Each day in court peeled back another layer of my old life. The charity events, the perfect photos, the illusion of stability, they were all props in a play I hadn't realized I'd been performing. On the 12th day, the prosecutor called me again, this time to identify a document. It was Vera's journal. He read aloud, "March 20th. Better he never knows. Devon's confidence is his strength. Learning he's genetically compromised would destroy him." When he finished, the room felt colder. The defense tried a final gambit. They offered me a settlement in exchange for a lenient statement at sentencing. "You'd never have to testify again," Peyton said quietly during recess. "We can close this chapter." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not closing a chapter that isn't finished. I'm ending the book." He didn't ask again. Closing arguments felt like weather building to a storm. The prosecutor spoke of arrogance masquerading as legacy, of love warped into control. The defense clung to sentiment, painting Vera as a frail old woman who acted out of misguided devotion. The jury deliberated for 2 days, 48 hours of waiting that felt like years. When they returned, I stood. The judge's voice was steady. We, the jury, find the defendant, Vera Caldwell, guilty of murder in the first degree. A collective exhale swept the room. Then, we find the defendant, Devon Hartwell, guilty of insurance fraud and conspiracy after the fact. Vera didn't react. Devon closed his eyes. The judge set sentencing for the following month. Court adjourned. People rushed for quotes. Cameras flashed. Dr. Reeves reached for my shoulder and whispered, "It's over." But it wasn't, not yet. Outside, rain began to fall, light at first, then relentless. I walked through it without an umbrella, each drop a baptism of sorts, washing away years of shame that hadn't been mine to carry. When I reached the courthouse steps, a reporter shouted, "Ms. Vale, what do you want people to take from this?" I paused. "That silence protects liars," I said, "and that truth, even when it hurts, is the only thing that saves you." Then I walked away from the cameras, from the marble, from the ghosts. Sentencing was still ahead, but for the first time since my son's heart had stopped, I could breathe without guilt pressing on my lungs. The lie was dead. The truth was alive, and so was I. The day of sentencing dawned gray and steady, the kind of sky that looks undecided between rain and grace. I dressed deliberately, black trousers, white blouse, no jewelry. Nothing that could be mistaken for celebration. Justice, I'd learned, isn't something you celebrate, it's something you survive. The courthouse was quieter this time. Fewer cameras, fewer gawkers. Only those who had truly lived inside the story were left. My mother, my sister Camille, Dr. Reeves, and Patricia from the bookstore. Devon's new wife, Melissa, sat near the back with their twin boys, faces pale but composed. She'd filed for divorce the day after his conviction, but still brought the children. They deserved to know the truth, she'd said. I admired her for that. When they led Vera into the courtroom, the hush was almost reverent. Gone was the elegant matriarch in tailored suits. The prison uniform flattened her authority. Still, she carried herself with the same bone-deep arrogance, chin lifted, eyes glassy, and unrepentant. Devon followed, wrists shackled, head bowed. He looked like a man who'd finally learned what humility costs when it arrives too late. The judge's voice filled the room. "Vera Caldwell, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the premeditated murder of your grandson, Noah Vale Hartwell." There was a murmur, then stillness. Vera's jaw tightened. She didn't speak, didn't plead, didn't so much as blink. She simply turned her head toward the gallery, scanning faces until her gaze stopped, on me. I didn't look away. For the first time in our years of war, the distance between us felt level. She had always towered over me, financially, socially, emotionally. But now we were both simply women who had lost everything, one to pride, the other to lies. The judge continued, "Devon Hartwell, for your part in the concealment of this crime and the subsequent insurance fraud, you are sentenced to 25 years in state prison." Devon's shoulders shook once, whether from tears or relief. I couldn't tell. He mouthed something, maybe I'm sorry, but the words died against the air. Then the judge looked directly at me. "Ms. Vale, would you like to make a statement?" Every sound in the courtroom faded. The shuffle of paper, the scratch of pens, even the rhythmic hum of the ventilation. I stood, palms damp, voice steady. "For 7 years," I began, "I lived under a lie so heavy it nearly erased me. I believed my blood was poison, that I had killed my son by being born with the wrong genes. And while I carried that guilt, his killers carried on with their lives, throwing fundraisers, hosting luncheons, building companies. They let the world call me unfit, cursed, defective." I turned to face Vera. "You killed Noah because you couldn't bear the thought that your precious family name carried imperfection. You took a life to protect a legacy. But what you never understood is that love, not lineage, is what makes something worth preserving. Noah was perfect, not because of his genes, but because he was loved." Vera didn't flinch. She never would. But Devon did. His sob broke the silence like glass cracking under heat. I continued. For years, I begged God to tell me why my son had to die. Today, I understand it wasn't divine punishment, it was human arrogance. You turned science into a weapon and pride into motive. You made grief into a prison and expected me to serve the sentence. But I'm free now. You aren't. I turned back to the judge. I don't forgive them. I don't owe them that. Some things aren't forgivable, but I forgive myself for believing their lies, for shrinking under their cruelty, for carrying guilt that never belonged to me. I forgive the version of me who didn't know better, and I intend to live every day as proof that truth may not heal everything, but it sets you free enough to start again. When I sat down, my mother's hand found mine. She was crying quietly, a sound somewhere between relief and release. Camille's head rested against her shoulder. Behind them, Melissa wiped her eyes while the twins watched me with wide, solemn curiosity, the unknowing witnesses of a legacy rewritten. The judge nodded. Your words are entered into record, Ms. Vale. The gavel came down, sharp and final. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters waited again, though fewer this time. One of them, young and earnest, asked, Ms. Vale, what happens now? I smiled, a small, honest thing. Now I build something new. That afternoon, I signed papers finalizing 2 lawsuits. The first, a civil suit against the Hartwell estate for emotional damages and defamation. The second, a claim against the hospital for record negligence. Between settlements and insurance restitution, the amount came to nearly $3 million. I didn't want the money, but I knew exactly what to do with it. A third went to the Innocence Project because I knew how it felt to be wrongly blamed, condemned by appearances and silence. Another third went to founding the Noah Vale Foundation, dedicated to genetic counseling for families navigating hereditary diseases, families who deserved compassion, not condemnation. The final third I used to buy a small house in Oak Park, a 2-story place with a garden fenced in white. The soil was soft and welcoming. In spring, I planted roses that would bloom every year around the time Noah was born, petals pale gold, his favorite color in the hospital mobile that had spun above his crib. Dr. Reeves visited once, months later, with coffee and quiet conversation. You turned grief into purpose, she said softly. I turned it into direction, I corrected her. Purpose still hurts too much. She smiled. Direction leads to healing. Maybe she was right. One evening, a letter arrived from Devon, a long, meandering apology written from prison stationery. He said he'd finally tested positive for Huntington's. Symptoms minor, but undeniable. He wrote that he didn't expect forgiveness, only understanding. I didn't write back, but I read it twice, then folded it neatly, placed it in a box beside Noah's hospital bracelet, and whispered, You got what you wanted, Devon. You preserved the name, but it cost you everything real. Weeks passed. The world kept moving in its quiet way. Birds nested in the eaves of the porch. The roses began to bloom, small and defiant against the wind. One afternoon, Melissa arrived with the twins. They were 6 now, bright, curious, innocent. They wanted to meet their big brother's mom, she said gently. We sat in the garden, surrounded by sunlight and the smell of roses. I showed them Noah's picture. He was only 3 weeks old, I told them, but he changed my life. They listened the way children do when truth sounds like magic. Before they left, one of them asked, Is Noah in heaven? Yes, I said, and he's happy now that we know the truth. When the gate closed behind them, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, something quieter, sturdier. I looked up at the sky, pale and endless. You were never broken, Noah, I whispered, and neither was I. Then, for the first time in years, I smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because I had learned to live with what remained. The seasons shifted quietly that year, like someone turning down the volume on grief. Spring surrendered to summer, and the roses in my garden bloomed with a kind of stubborn defiance. Every morning, I'd step outside with my coffee and watch sunlight catch on the petals, soft gold fading to cream at the edges, exactly the way Noah's skin had glowed under the NICU lights. It had been 8 years since his death, 1 year since the truth. Some mornings I still woke expecting the old ache, the automatic self-blame, the echo of Devon's words. But instead, there was only stillness. Not peace yet, but stillness. The Noah Vale Foundation was up and running by then. We'd already funded 27 genetic counseling grants, helping families who might otherwise have been scared into silence or shame. Every time I read a thank you letter from a parent who'd found answers instead of accusations, I felt something inside me knit back together. I'd learned that healing doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from usefulness, from turning pain into purpose. Dr. Reeves joined the Foundation's board. At our first annual meeting, she shared something she'd never told me before. Years earlier, during her residency, she had once missed an anomaly in a chart, a clerical error that led to a child's misdiagnosis. The baby survived, but she'd carried that failure with her ever since. I think that's why I couldn't stop digging into Noah's case, she said, eyes glistening in the dim conference room light. Part of me needed to make it right, to prove that systems could still do good. I nodded. Maybe that's all any of us are trying to do, make something right in the only way we can. After the meeting, we stood outside in the evening air, both quiet for a while. The city hummed below us, the world carrying on, as if none of it had noticed our ghosts. You know, she said finally, you never really get closure. You just learn to live with an open ending. I think that's the truest thing anyone's ever told me, I replied. That fall, I received another letter. This one unexpected, its envelope yellowed at the corners, handwriting precise and old-fashioned. It was from Margaret, Vera's estranged younger sister. Dear Ms. Vale, I saw the trial coverage. I don't expect this letter to mean much, but you deserve to know that Vera wasn't born cruel. She was made that way, by a family that worshipped perfection and punished weakness. I left at 17, the day our father told us that reputation mattered more than kindness. She stayed, and it consumed her. This doesn't excuse what she did. Nothing could. But I thought you should know that pride was her inheritance, not her excuse. I hope you find peace where she could not. I read it twice, then placed it in the same box where Noah's bracelet and Devon's apology letter lived. I didn't know whether it comforted me or deepened the sadness. Maybe both. In December, I visited the prison for the first and only time. Devon had written again, shorter this time, humbler. I don't want to die pretending I didn't love him, he'd said. I just didn't know how to love without control. The visit room smelled like metal and bleach. Devon looked older, hair threaded with gray, tremor faint in his hands, the beginning signs of the disease his mother had killed to keep hidden. Renata, he said softly when he saw me. Devon. He tried to smile, but it collapsed into exhaustion. You look strong. I am, I said simply. He nodded. I'm sorry for all of it. I know. He studied me, maybe waiting for absolution. Do you ever think about what might have been? No, I said, because what was already taught me enough. For a moment, silence bridged the space between us, an almost peace, fragile and temporary. I stood. You'll get older, Devon. The disease will come. When it does, I hope you remember that the truth didn't destroy you. The lie did. He nodded once, eyes glassy. Tell Noah I'm sorry. I already did, I whispered. I left before the guards had to ask. The drive home felt lighter than I expected. I stopped by the cemetery at dusk, the sky streaked lavender and blue. The roses I'd planted there had survived the first frost. I knelt by Noah's headstone, tracing his name. Noah Vale Hartwell. 3 weeks of life. A lifetime of love. I brought you letters, I said quietly. From your father. From your grandmother's sister. From people who didn't understand until it was too late. I placed the sealed envelopes beside a small candle, struck a match, and watched the flame bend in the wind. You were the start of everything, baby, I whispered. Even the pain, but look what grew from it. I set fire to the letters and watched them curl into ash. Smoke rose, carrying all the words that had weighed me down. Guilt, blame, anger, until they disappeared into the night. When the last ember faded, I smiled. Some stories don't get happy endings, I said softly. But sometimes they get just endings, and that's enough. I stayed until the stars appeared, seal and bright and honest. Then I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and walked back toward the car. At home, the porch light glowed golden. Inside, my house smelled faintly of coffee and roses. I sat at my desk, opened my journal, and began to write. Not about grief this time, but about resilience. About how truth doesn't always heal you, but it frees you to live again. Before bed, I glanced once more at Noah's photo on the mantel, his tiny fist resting on his cheek, his eyes closed in perfect peace. You were loved, I told him. You still are. And for the first time since the day he left, I felt it. Not just the loss, but the love. The part that couldn't be poisoned, couldn't be buried, couldn't be stolen by legacy or lies. What survives isn't the tragedy. It's the tenderness that refused to die with it. That night, I slept without dreams.